Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
What's going on, guys? Evan the Bloodborne enthusiast here, bringing another Bloodborne gameplay commentary, what will hopefully be the first of many. As always, this is the creation of an Elly character, which is typically characterized by spell use, and basically that, spell use and weapons. This is a Souls game, weapons that spell off skill use. So we're sort of in the Victorian era now. That means no more real spells, but now we have quote-unquote tools, or hunter's tools. And now we also have a pistol. So, basically we're saying our main stat's going to be Arcane, and that's what sort of defines it. Before we get into that, there's a couple things I want to touch on, such as what's going to be going on in this video. About 50 minutes long, give or take, so we are going to be covering what this Let's Play is going to look like, the starting build, things like that. We're also going to talk about Central Yharnam as a whole. We're going to fight the Cleric Beast, and we're going to talk about Arcane as a build within the Bloodborne community. Obviously this video is going out pretty late for a Let's Play, considering the game's been out for a little while now, and the sooner you put these things out the better, but as always I'm not necessarily going for the most views so much as I'm going for the content that I want to create, for better or worse. And a big part of that for me was having played through like most of the game before I actually started doing these, because I'd like to know a little bit of what I'm talking about. Because if I'm going to be describing how to do a character build, there's not a lot of point in doing so until I actually know the strengths and weaknesses of the build, in my opinion. Opinions may vary, so we'll talk a little bit about that too at the end of the video, as how I feel like Arcane builds work, how to build them, things like that, roadmap, all sorts of stuff. So basically this will be like a standard Let's Play with sort of an audio overview of the Arcane skill build, the skill set, and how to go about doing that. So that'll be definitely the first part of the series as we get geared up, as Elly gets geared up on screen to be an Arcane character, and what that looks like, etc, etc. So, a couple things before we jump into all that. Special thanks to another YouTube channel, the link will be in the description. Not sure how he likes his name read, so I just say ILLMVTIC24. Link to his channel is in the description. This guy really came through for me. I am terrible, guys, at the character creation sliders on any game. If it's not like presets and you have to use sliders, I am not your man. And when I'm going to do a YouTube experience, I kind of like the character to look how I want them to look, since I'm going to be staring at them not only as I play, but staring at them as I do these commentaries, and just staring at the character a lot. Now, granted, most of these characters are in armor, so you don't really get to see what they look like anyway, but it doesn't hurt to have a character that you like the appearance of. But if you're like me and you have no idea how to make that character look good, you're basically stuck on presets. And so I was looking around YouTube and I saw this guy's channel, and he seemed to be excellent at the character creation side of these games. So I definitely wanted to reach out to him and, get him to create my character. So I contacted him over Twitter, a real friendly guy, and for a PayPal fee, he went ahead and created the character for me. I'm not going to reveal that amount, nor am I going to say he does this on the norm. I don't necessarily think he's looking for like frequent Twitter commissions, but I just call it, or yeah, Twitter's right. It's like, I haven't used Twitter in years. Like, I literally only use Twitter to contact people, and I do that probably once every 6 months at best. So yeah, rarely use Twitter, even for my own quote-unquote channel. But alright, big shout out to him. I think that he did a great job of making my character actually look like Elly from Xenogears, which is always the inspiration, which was the inspiration for the YouTube account name and everything. He was a huge Xenogears fanatic, for those of you that don't know. But that doesn't have a lot to do with Bloodborne, admittedly. Alright, yeah, so the build. How this compares to other builds and other games that are Souls. I call Bloodborne Blood Souls, essentially. Great game, by the way. I love Bloodborne. I'm going to go ahead on the record now, my first upload, and say this is definitely way more of a PvE game than it is a PvP game compared to all the other Souls games. You know, none of them are really PvP by nature. They're just sort of, you know, anyway, these Souls games are a single-player experience with a cool multiplayer element. This game takes it to the next level by saying it's, in my opinion, probably one of the best single-player experiences of any Souls game yet, but definitely the multiplayer is probably at its lowest, in my opinion, in terms of connectivity and things like that. Probably structurally still better designed than Dark Souls 2 was, because Dark Souls 2 is a disaster, in my opinion, but Dark Souls 2 you could routinely find people, whereas on Bloodborne it can be a little harder. Anyway, maybe that'll change with time. This isn't a PvP commentary, just throwing that out there. So if you're starting build, you want to do Cruel Fates. This is going to be a 50 Arcane build. When you look at breakpoints on Bloodborne, 25 points is the soft cap, or up to that point you see no diminishing returns as you level up stats. And at the 50 mark, that's when the returns become so negligible they're not really worth advancing points in unless you're just doing a maximum level build, if you will. So, Cruel Fate has really low blood tinge, and since I don't intend to be using my Hunter's bullets for the guns, I tend to be using my bullets, my Quicksilver bullets for the spells or the tools. Spells in this game are called tools. You equip an item, you use the item in your inventory, and that casts a spell. And it consumes bullets to do so. So, since my bullets are basically always going to be thrown at these spells, if you will, these tools, I won't be using the gun very much. So, a very low blood tinge is ideal. So, Cruel Fate is optimal. Also has the highest starting Arcane, and that's pretty cool too. The soft cap for Arcane, like I said, is 25. You'll be going there right away because 15, or 14 rather, is such a big start. Also, 15 is the sort of the low breakpoint for Arcane because most of the starting tools require 15 Arcane, one of which buffs weapons, which a lot of people like to use. Empty Shell, Empty Phantasmal Shell, I believe. Something, it's an approximation of that. And that takes 15 Arcane to equip and activate, so 15 isn't just a bad number on a lot of different characters, so you're not really having wasted stat points very often with Cruel Fates. Otherwise, I don't know what the final build's going to look like yet. This is a PvE build, so it doesn't need to be like PvP level efficiency. Well, although I'm sure it'll be close. Although I think Arcane is pretty poopy for PvP, which is why it's not a PvP character. So, a couple things also about that build. You need to take Vitality where a level you're comfortable with it. Vitality can go, I believe, up to 50 before the returns get really poor. I like to take it to about 20 early game so I feel safe. I can make a mistake or two and not die. This game doesn't actually have endurance, for those of you that don't know it yet. Rather, it has endurance, but it doesn't have an equip load, excuse me. So, you don't necessarily have to raise an endurance stat. You can equip whatever you want, whenever you want, and that's a thing. Alright, so, looking at that, oh, real quick, this guy we're killing here, we're basically killing him purely because he can drop blood gems, which can fortify weapons early in the game. I don't really expect to get a great one from him, but it's okay to farm him early if you're looking to socket your weapon with something, even if it's small early game. Usually worth your time to farm him a little bit to get a decent starting gem, make your life just a little easier once you get to fortifying weapons, which you'll see in later videos. Okay, so endurance still raises stamina up to a soft cap of 40, so you can get 40 endurance and be increasing your stamina bar up to that point. I really have not experienced anything that makes me feel like I need 40 stamina in this game, since 40 endurance for maximum stamina in this game, because gunshot parry is a much larger thing, which doesn't consume a lot of stamina. The weapon attack, the weapon openings don't seem to be as long or as stamina consuming. This is more of an in-your-face kind of battle system where I just don't need to be able to swing a full stamina bar away. I don't stun lock enemies very often into full combos where I need the full combo, so you know, I think endurance is more like something you take definitely to 20 points on just about any build in my opinion. Then more points after that is kind of like splash points that you have left over if you're capping yourself at a certain level or you want to prioritize other stats for it, which you should. This build is going to get at minimum 16 strength and 12 dexterity for, to my knowledge right now, what is the only truly viable full-on arcane weapon in the game. We'll talk more about that as I get into more of the intricacies of the weapon choices, or the lack thereof of the intricacies. Okay, up at the side benefits with picking Cruel Fate / Bloodline Arcane in general is it does raise your item discovery rate, which is cool early game when you're trying to get some blood vials early on, find materials to upgrade weapons. So that's sort of a hidden advantage that I'd recommend. I also think Arcane's kind of a cool build and style. Once again, I think it's suboptimal, but definitely viable. So some other advantages that I want to touch on briefly is it does give you access to a wide variety of elemental damages, like in previous Souls games. But in previous Souls games, say Dark Souls 1, you know, elemental damage didn't necessarily scale off a stat. It was just a fixed amount. Well, in this game, it scales off your arcane stat, so you can get a considerable amount of fire damage, or lightning damage, or arcane damage, which is pretty cool. There's a couple bosses that are relatively weak to those elements, certain enemies as well. So there's a big function to that, and if you know what you're doing, which I do because I've run through the game to experience how to get the right items early, if you follow the right paths through areas, you can get your elemental weapons early, which was a big complaint about being in arcane classes. You didn't actually get elemental weapons or the ability to make elemental weapons for a good bit of time into the game, so you just were playing sort of a gimped character until you got the correct gems, if you will. And that's not a problem for me. I can get elemental weapons really early, or weapons that at least you can substitute as elemental weapons early game. Some of those are not what you'd expect. So a lot of weapons randomly scale off arcane, so you'll find like a flamethrower, for example, or a hunter's torch, Molotovs, like your consumables and stuff like that early game, in most of the game really, oil urns, all these items that you may have experienced in Bloodborne or will experience are all actually scaling off your arcane stat to a fair amount. They significantly increase the damage. So what does that mean? Well, it means early game, you don't, like very early game, say first 4 hours on a slow play where you don't have any option to get an arcane weapon, you know, that's not a big deal because no one's weapons are going to be like that fantastic at that point unless they're like super over leveling, which means, you know, my Molotovs and my oil urns, which in this game are extremely damaging and useful to a lot of enemies who are weak to fire, and some that aren't, you know, they're really strong early on. And as early as Old Yarnum, which we'll see later in future uploads, you know, you get a hunter's torch, which, yes, it's a torch, but it's unlimited uses, and you can stab people with it more or less, and torch them, literally. It's actually really good for a lot of the early areas in the game when you have arcane points up. I mean, it's part of like an actual weapon combo where you sort of hit them once with your right-hand weapon to give them the stagger, then you torch them over and over, because a lot of enemies you fight early in the game don't have a lot of poise, and the ones that do have a lot of poise are weak to parry anyway. So you should either be parrying them or hitting them once, then just torching them to death. Really fun, different than a lot of other characters. It sort of varies up your combo a little bit. I recommend it. I think it's a good time. Okay, so that's kind of the arcane build in a nutshell. Big overview of how you go about doing this, which we will see in the videos is. So you fight through the first 3 bosses of the game in sort of a standard approach. The important thing is you grab the hunter's torch before you fight Father Gascone, or is it Gasconi? I don't even know how you pronounce it. But before you fight what could be considered the first or second boss of the game, you want to, excuse me, rabbit. You want to stock up on Molotovs and things like that to weaken the bosses you're fighting if you're struggling with boss battles, which the bosses seem a lot harder than they are early in the game, like most Souls games, where if you haven't had a lot of experience in battling them and you don't know the patterns, they can be challenging. And since there's no shield, which I admittedly turtled a lot in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, you know, hide behind the shield and block a lot while you learn their patterns before you start going in. That's not an option here. You sort of have to get aggressive right away. The combat system, since you regain HP by hitting enemies and things like that, really favors a more aggressive play style. So that might seem like a challenge early game, but if you're looking to get some of that range combat and looking to make these bosses, which seem considerably harder when your stats are kind of gimped in the first 2 hours, no problem. You just haven't experienced the joy of doing a high damage Molotov yet. The only issue with the Molotov method is when you use Molotovs, of course, to get more, you either have to farm enemies at a very low rate or more likely buy them from the vendor in the Hunter's Dream, which it's kind of a pain, admittedly, if you screw up the boss fight. But on the flip side, I guess it arguably could be cool if you're thinking like, oh, I'm preparing for the big hunt. I don't know, it just depends on how much you want to lore justify it or farm justify it, but a big part of the other builds that get an advantage is, you can keep putting points into your skills to level up your weapon, and since that's arguably over leveling, just think you're going to be leveling in the correct range, but using your excess blood echoes to upgrade your stuff, upgrade your items in your inventory rather than your character. So it's definitely like money down a rat hole, but not a big deal. Souls are plentiful. I'm never going to get used to the blood echoes, guys. Blood echoes are plentiful enough that you're not necessarily out a whole lot by spending them. Early game, a big hang-up, I think, was for me and a lot of other players is like this urge to save up on consumables, and to a point that's true and to a point it's not. And let me explain. Early on, farming blood vials kind of disrupts your immersion in the game and just kind of slows everything down. As you may run out of blood vials if you're new to this series or new to this game or struggling with some of the bosses, because you carry 20 blood vials in a fight, right? If you wind up using all 20 blood vials in one of the first 3 bosses, which is completely reasonable if you don't know the fights very well, you can definitely spin through a whole inventory worth of blood vials and have to replenish from your sort of deposit in the Hunter's Dream, your item box, which ultimately, as you go through the game, you're going to have so many blood vials or the capacity to farm them so fast that burning through blood vials for boss fights isn't a huge deal once you get to about the mid-game point, but early game it can be kind of like frustrating if you're trying to die over and over to bosses, which admittedly is part of the Souls experience or the Bloodborne experience at this point, is having to die a lot to learn a boss fight. That's kind of part of the charm of the game, of the series, of the genre. But when you have to go and disrupt your learning, disrupt your gameplay to go farm more vials, that can be kind of a drag, which is kind of a problem in Demon Souls 2, but grass could sometimes be a little harder to farm than blood vials are. So that's just something to keep in mind. Don't stress out about used blood vials or used materials on upgrades or really even lost insight. Like any of the consumable in this game is eventually common enough that you're not going to miss it. So just don't worry about stuff like that. The biggest missable in this game is NPC interactions, frankly, most of which give you gestures and stuff like that. So missing a gesture doesn't really impact gameplay very much at all, if at all. It just kind of bothers people like me conceptually, as we want to have everything. Okay, so I already kind of ran over the advantages of arcane builds or the elemental builds of this game. Let me talk about some of the negatives, and they are plentiful. I do not recommend it for your first character because it's easier just to play a build that focuses strength or skill or a mix of both. Even Blood Tinge is probably an easier build for your first character. At least in my opinion, that's how I found it. I found Blood Tinge to be pretty awesome for my first playthrough, actually, and that's the skill that governs guns and things related to guns. Anyway, so the pure arcane build, unless you're going to over-level, really won't have the points to go into a high strength game, and spoiler alert, eventually you'll get a weapon that's called a cannon, and the cannon is really, really strong and requires a lot of strength. You probably won't have the strengths to spare. So that's a forewarning. You're going to miss out on some pretty useful equipment with such low strength skill. Very, very few weapons scale fully with arcane, which is, I cannot overstate how much of a disaster that is when you play this game. So the versatility is, in this game, you socket items into weapons to change their elemental damage, basically. It's sort of like a traditional RPG thing, you socket an item with a gem or with a rune or something like that that buffs it. That's pretty standard RPG stuff. Oh, clearly I didn't know that dude was still kicking. The disadvantage of the arcane build is until you get that gem, you don't really have a weapon suitable. And even once you get elemental weapon gems, when you socket a weapon with an element, it usually only transfers part of the damage to arcane, and if it does transfer all the damage to arcane, you don't always get a high multiplier. So basically, if you think of Bloodborne in the sense of your weapon scales on skill at D and strength on D, it's a quality weapon, so you have all the skill and strength equally to get your most damage, frankly. that's not a thing here. Like, if I socket it with an Arcane gem or an Elemental gem, all that damage will become, you know, Arcane modifier. But the Arcane modifier might not be an A or an S. It's more likely going to be a D or a C, which means you're not getting a lot of scaling for your all-in Arcane. Thankfully, some really excellent weapons do touch on Arcane, but your weapon diversity is extremely low, which is not only a matter of the stat points allocated, but a matter of just your straight-up options. Okay, so let's talk about what my options are, although they are limited. Realistically, you're going to wind up using either Ludwig's Holy Blade, which is what 90% of Arcane builds are going to build, including mine, which means you need 16 strength and 12 skill. So do not level over 16 strength and 12 skill early in the game. It is a mistake. Just don't do it, because you're not going to know if you're going to want points in other things yet if you're trying to go the Arcane build. So if you're going Arcane, I repeat, 16 strength, 12 skill. If you're going past that, you may potentially be wasting stat points. That could change based on other weapons you decide you want to pick up as you play, but you can't guarantee yourself that unless you've experienced them and know for certain. Okay. Also, I recommend the Hunter's Axe early in the game because it's probably just the best starting weapon. Of course, opinions may vary, but I find that the Spin to Win R2 that you've been seeing me using is just one of the safest, best ways, low-risk ways to take out enemies early in the game, including the big ones until you know your gunshot parries. If you know your gunshot parries, you can probably pick anything because they'll trivialize most enemies, but if you're looking to save some Quicksilver bullets, once again, Spin to Win Axe, Hunter's Axe, is just a pretty awesome weapon that's been known to carry players all the way through the game due to the weapon versatility and sheer strength. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, okay, so I talked about gems earlier, and you have to socket a weapon to get a fire gem, and I'll tell you how to get there, and you'll see me on screen get it very early in the game. So that's actually not a huge deal, very limiting factor of the build. However, a greater encumbrance is late game finding high quality gems. If you haven't seen the gemming system, this is all going to be very confusing, so bear with me. Most weapons are going to have 3 empty sockets, and in those sockets you can put little upgrades, and these are called gems, or ruins, basically gems. So, we'd be looking for gems that are like, say, plus 20% attack damage if we were a physical attacker. 20% is actually a lot of damage. Translates to a ton of damage on the character, very important, and some weapons require like 2 to 3 of these, so that's a big deal. So our first loss is we're going to have to socket a weapon with an elemental gem to give it elemental damage or arcane damage, which is just a euphemism for magic damage, by the way. So, okay, my 3 slots are now down to 2 slots because I had to convert all my damage into fire. In the case of Ludwig's Blade, I tend to leave it as fire, so to get a high-quality fire gem, I'm already losing one of my 3 slots, which lowers my overall DPS, in my experience. Okay, so the next big thing is finding high-end elemental gems for your weapons is very, very difficult. We're talking like end-game dungeons with low drop chances. And reaching those in-game dungeons is truly in-game, as in, you can't really like speed run to them or take shortcuts to get to them super early or compensate with skill for lack of gear. Like, that's not a thing. Like, you're just going to have to play through most of the game before you can start trying to farm for those gems. And farming those gems is difficult as a matter of random number generator. They don't drop all that often. And even worse, it's just not a very practical thing. There's nowhere you can like speed run to grab one. There's no guaranteed drops of one. So getting gems for your Ludwig's Holy Blade is going to be pretty much a disaster. As you can see, gunshot parry is the easiest way to bring these guys down. Who, by the way, these are the dudes you want to farm, is both the tall enemies in the sewers, the guy that swings the big cane around, and the dude that's got the axe there with the weird growth on his head. Those are the guys that drop shards to upgrade your weapons early game if you're looking to do that. I would liberally upgrade your Hunter's Axe, by the way. It's not a bad weapon to have upgraded, frankly. And it's going to be so long before you get a Ludwig's Holy Blade, which is probably going to be the first real weapon for, you know, an arcane build that you wind up leveling, that there's just no need to wait. Go ahead and upgrade your Hunter's Axe, make your life a little easier. It's a quality of life thing. You'll find enough other gems in the environment to fully upgrade Ludwig's to, you know, +6, which is the number you need to sock an elemental gem. That's another thing. Most weapons can't even be given elemental gems until they get to +6. But not a huge deal, just something to keep in mind. If you're not familiar with a lot of the gameplay mechanics, I know a lot of this won't make sense. I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can. A lot of it's really simple once you see it, not so easy when you read it. So just bear with me. It'll make more sense as you continue watching this series, right guys? Alright, so problem finding gems. The whole arcane thing in this game feels kind of gimmicky. A lot of the hunter's tools are neat, but fairly useless. And that's not to say they aren't useful, but it's all very cumbersome. A lot of the hunter's tools you could have just would have been maybe arguably better off having stats and strength so you can use the cannon, which leads a lot of arcane players to wind up leveling strength as well to get access to the cannon and other useful things. I think it's another viable build that I won't be showing. I'm doing the all-in 50 arcane build, but I will mention what I've seen the alternative arcane build being, which I don't know if it's necessarily better. It's definitely easier. There's less emphasis on hunter tools and more emphasis on actual like melee combat, which as far as I can tell is better. One weapon you will get early game, basically at the end of this video you'll see it, or at least see me having the ability to purchase it, is the Kirkhammer, which you can get in the first hour of gameplay. And Kirkhammer is definitely like a viable in-game weapon, and like all the weapons in this game, it's a trick weapon, so it's basically the same sword as a Ludwig's, which you haven't seen yet, but it'll be main on this character. But it is more or less like a short sword, and then the main is like a giant hammer, straight up like a giant hammer, which is pretty cool, kind of ridiculous, but still pretty cool. So you've got this giant hammer thing, and it's got some scaling with arcane, which is great, and it's got some scaling with strength. So you can do like an arcane splash, like get enough arcane to use whatever tools you want to use, which tends to be in the 15, 20, 25 range at maximum really. Then you can dump strength to 25, where your hammer will still scale off the strength, and you wind up with a pretty good Kirkhammer build. So that's something to think about. You won't see it on this, but you can definitely Google that or check some forums. Reddit's great. There's a lot of information about Arcane on Reddit. It's where I got a lot of my guiding steps early in the game. So Google some Reddit threads. You should be able to get to them through Google easily or search within Reddit. Blah, blah, blah. I'll stop telling you how to be a basic human being using it. Just let you know that if you need additional resources on Arcane, you can definitely get them on Reddit. Okay. So, as I was saying, the roadmap for these characters, the Arcane characters, are essentially down the first two bosses with no particular tricks or gimmicks, other than the fact that your Molotov cocktails or oil urns, if you want to burn them, are going to do a lot. Know that your flamethrower early game, if you're willing to spend some shards and upgrade it, is extremely useful. The flamethrower, which you won't see in this video, you will see in the future, is actually pretty excellent on Arcane builds. Okay, so you need to down the first two bosses, then get into Old Yharnam. In Old Yharnam, you will have your opportunity to get the Hunter Shorts, will be your first like early game, no upgrade required fire weapon, doesn't use Quicksilver bullets. Everything down there is super weak to fire, so that'll be a big moment of growth for your character where you'll suddenly feel like this Arcane thing might have been worth it. So that'll be good. Then once you down the third boss, or the Blood-Starved Beast, you'll have access to a fire gem if you follow the correct path through the game, and I think it's pronounced Tawnatrice, not even sure, which is a lightning mace, which is extremely excellent on any character. Doesn't need to be arcane, but it does get some scaling with arcane, so that'll also be your chance to farm shards, the mid-game shards, which let you get your weapons to +6. +6 is the needed amount to socket a gem that adds fire damage. You'll also be able to get a fire gem and pretty much everything you need. So once the third boss goes down, the whole build comes online. You get your in-game weapon, you get the shards to upgrade your in-game weapon, and you get your gem to turn it to fire damage and scale off arcane. So it all comes together all at once. That's right after the third boss, and that timing is not bad at all. Not as early as some other characters, but earlier than some others as well. In my experience, the slowest character to come online is actually a Blood Tinge build due to its reliance on ammo, and finding the correct weapons to scale up Blood Tinge is another discussion. However, there is some chance I might do like a Blood Tinge only video, where instead of doing like a Let's Play, this is a full Let's Play as you can see, I would do an edited segments clip where I just show you how to build a Blood Tinge character. So if you get a chance, leave something in the comments and let me know if you're interested in seeing a Blood Tinge guide, maybe in lieu of uploads on this regular playthrough, if you're just more interested in seeing a Let's Play with me rambling and discussing gameplay mechanics as I go. Okay, so some other things to know for early characters, since we're definitely in that stage of Elly's development, is blood vial farming is worth your time. The reason I say that is Central Yharnam, or the area we're in right now, the start of the game, is probably one of the best areas in the game that I've found to farm blood vials. Ultra late game, it's easier just to go farm blood echoes and trade those in and just buy them from the store in town. But this early in the game, it's actually more efficient to farm them here. And why it's maybe worth just going ahead and grinding up to 99 vials in storage, or at least say 75 or a relatively high number, is the small amount of souls you get in this area is more impactful early in the game when the gear is like still in its infancy stage and cheapness of blood echoes. So like those echoes are still precious early on. So it's actually a pretty good idea to do central Yarnum runs to get, you know, at least 50 blood vials in storage. That's good if you wipe on some boss fights, which you probably inevitably will, so you can keep doing the boss fight as you restock every time you die. So you can use those early souls to get some early points into strength to 16, dex to 12, level the vitality a little bit. Probably actually skimp on endurance for a while. So that's a good thing. Do some central Yarnums. I think everybody should. If you're lucky, you'll get enough shards to upgrade your weapon at an additional level you may not have been able to before. Blah, blah, blah. Another thing early on is like, so you can't level up the minute you enter the Hunter's Dream, as most players have realized. Which is a lot of, early on in this game's release, led a lot of players to believe you couldn't actually upgrade but for the first boss fights. Because the doll, you actually upgrade with the doll. It's kind of like the maiden from Demon Souls. She actually becomes animate the minute you get one insight. Insight is like the humanity of this game, but you don't need to consume it all that often. It just kind of sits in your inventory and eventually makes life a little harder, but we won't get to that till far later into the game. You need one insight to make that doll come to life. So you can find 2 consumables in Central Yarnum called Madman's Knowledge. You can eat it, consume it, you have 1 insight, you go back to the Hunter's Dream, voila, you can level up. She's animate now, you can talk to her. Ooh, my character's becoming more aware of the world through their insight, and I realize the doll is alive. So, lore conversation aside, get some insights to level up before the first bosses. If you don't want to use a consumable for whatever reason, you prefer them in the consumable form, that's actually not a big deal. You can successfully consume, or rather find insight actually by visually seeing a boss. So how this game works is, every time you see a boss, you get 1 insight. Killing a boss, I believe, gives you 3 insight. A couple bosses give you more, there's some other things you'll see in the game that give you insight, talking to certain people gives you insight. But for your purposes, early in the game, the hot numbers are 1 and 10. Here's why. 1 insight makes the doll come alive so you can level up. That's crucial, so if you're looking to do it before you ever see a boss, you know, go ahead and pop a Madman's Knowledge because that's your only method. If you are looking to not use anything, but you want a humanity to level up, go fight a boss. If you die to the boss, no big deal. You'll respawn with your insight, and from then on you can level up before your bosses. So, you know, there's one method. So another thing is you should have 10 insight, because there's really no way to waste any, to my knowledge, before then, by the end of Central Yarnum, if you use both your Madman's Knowledges. So what's cool about that is at 10 insight you open up another shop in town which takes insight as currency. There's really nothing there you're going to want to buy except for the resonant bells, which are the items that let you summon invasions and co-op. If you do co-op and down the boss, you get an insight, much like you got humanity in the previous Souls games, and some souls. You don't really need to farm insight for anything. I did farm a little insight through co-op with Elly because I just wanted to try the co-op system, and I wanted to buy a boss's item set. Many of the humanoid bosses that will, of course, have item sets that you can actually wear, like in the previous Souls games, like Ornstein's Smog's armor became available once you killed that boss. Alright, this is kind of like that too, only they go to the insight shop, and buying a whole set tends to cost 6-ish insight, more or less. So if you have 10 insight, that item shop awakens and goes to sleep again if you have less than 10 insight. Why that's kind of relevant early in the game before you have lots of insight, so by downing the second boss you'll be up to 10 insight with consumables. The shop is now open. Okay, so if you buy anything from that shop, it's now below 10 insight and that shop goes away. Okay, so you know, there's some relevance to that. If you're hoping to buy things from that shop, you need to buy everything you want in one fell swoop. Not necessarily anything that you're going to want. A lot of the boss armor sets, sets from bosses I mean, you see them and you're like, oh, I should buy that. The sets are probably unbelievable. Not really true. A lot of the sets you get early in the game. The first set I'm wearing here that we acquired from the sewers on camera, in my opinion, is better than Father Gascoigne's set, who's the second boss of the game, or the first if you go the backwards route. You know, you get Father Gascoigne's set, and you're like, oh, I have Father Gascoigne's set. Oh wait, the stats are actually worse than the armor I found in the sewers, or even the armor I bought in town. Because early in the game, resistance to anything but physical, thrust and blunt, in my opinion, is essentially worthless. The first boss, or excuse me, the third boss has a significant amount of poison damage, or poison resist can be pretty cool, but it doesn't really justify spending a bunch of insight on an item for higher poison resist early in the game. So don't feel pressured to go co-op for 10 hours and farm a bunch of insight for these items. They won't impact your gameplay very much. It takes a while in the game before you find item sets that are distinct, armor sets rather, that are distinctly better than the hunter's gear you find in the sewer. Kind of funny to think about, but I kind of like it since this game doesn't have like the weight classes on armor, like heavy armor or light armor. It's all just, you know, there is no encumbrance, you just equip what you want. So instead you wind up finding armor that specializes in certain things. So like one armor set that's usually worth buying is, for example, so we can talk a little bit more about armor variety in this game. I'm gonna start to this rants, it's kind of silly. Rants are easy. Like any Souls game, or Souls game by a new name, if you are cocky and overconfident in how you approach things, you can definitely get yourself killed. That hasn't changed. Here's one of the Madmen's knowledges I was talking about. That brings us up to 2 at this point. The only 2 you can find in Central Yarnum until after the second boss. A couple other things I want to call out while we're talking about items. You'll get the ability to fortify your weapons with gems and ruins, respectively, right after you down the second boss. Immediately after you down the second boss, you can upgrade your items, so, or upgrade it with runes, rather. So that's worth mentioning. You don't have to wait until a long point in the game to use blood gems, and you can get blood gems, you know, from that boss, or that like mini boss early on, like I was saying. He becomes a common enemy later, by the way, but early in the game, he can be kind of scary because you know, if you miss your parry, you get jacked up. Oh, and while I'm at it, someone had asked me on my first video if I'd recommend, you know, the Hunter's Blunderbuss or the pistol. Definitely the Blunderbuss. There's not a lot of enemies that you need a lot of range on your pistol, and the timing doesn't become much more strict with the pistol or the shotgun. However, some enemies, Blunderbuss is a shotgun really, some enemies, what you'll find interesting is it takes 2 pistol shots to stagger them, whereas only 1 Blunderbuss shot. It's just better to have the Blunderbuss, in my opinion. I think most players agree. So these videos are usually going to be like segmented in 50 minutes to 1 hour. And I was just talking about blood gems, and I was going to talk about something before that, and must confess I don't. Oh, I was going to talk about armor sets that, for example, might be worth getting or spending the insight on. So eventually you'll down a certain hunter, because he's like you, he's literally a hunter. If you down him, his armor set has the highest resistance to lightning or shock in the game, and that's pretty cool. There are some enemies that have a ton of lightning-based attacks, so having an armor set that's sort of specialized to beat those, you know, worth mentioning. That's probably worth your insight, because insight doesn't have a lot of function beyond buying those types of things. In fact, insight makes you weaker to certain status effects which are prevalent and extremely frustrating later in the game. Okay, so other things to talk about early in the game. NPC interactions are very missable in this game, and I recommend you actually do read ahead as you play to make sure you don't miss any of those interactions. As I do my gameplay commentaries, I will try to call out NPC interactions that you can most certainly miss, but you know, I can't guarantee they'll hit all of them, or you're probably going to be gameplaying ahead, since these uploads are honestly probably going to be about once a week, because I don't think I can get any more timeline that's more realistic than that. So realize that there are missable interactions. You can all, of course, cover them all in New Game Plus. You're not really out a whole lot from a lot of those misses, but if you're one of those people like me that gets kind of upset when you miss an interaction on their first playthrough, read ahead, otherwise you're definitely going to miss some. So, for example, the NPC I talked to in the sewer, it's very important you have that interaction there, because it unlocks a whole sort of quest tree that leads to a covenant, and if you're like me and you like to check out the covenants and all that noise, you want to hit her early in the game, like right there, and not miss it. So that's a big call. In fact, one of the biggest errors you can make early in the game, besides misspending stat points, I guess, would be missing that little interaction. So make sure you find her, make sure you talk to her, make sure you get the gesture Shrug Off Cape, because it looks pretty awesome. Alright, so About 10 minutes left in the video, we're coming up on the boss. When we get to the bosses in these, I'll actually talk about some boss fight strategy. Sort of one of my trademarks in the past was I wouldn't talk about the boss fight mechanics too much, because I wanted people to see the cinematic and enjoy the ambience of the boss fight. I don't find these bosses to be as epic as the Souls bosses. The fights are as fun, but they just don't visually excite me like some other boss fights did. So that's just something to call out. Some other things to call out: early game, since we're on like the first upload and you would be in the first part of your game if you're playing your character about now, is so don't stress out about consumables, don't feel the need to over upgrade. Like any Souls game, power leveling doesn't necessarily take you very far. There's no amount of leveling that allows you to sort of cheese or just do the fights. You have to just know them. So standard advice there. It is worth farming a full set of early blood vials, I'd say. And know that this first area here, Central Yarnum, it is very possible to skip basically this entire area if you know where all the shortcuts are. I don't recommend doing so because you're going to want to build up some souls and some items by going through here anyway. But if you're like speed running or just trying to get to the area, or you just want to unlock the whole area so that if you die you can get to all your blood echoes easily, that's definitely viable. You can open a series of shortcuts that you can navigate anywhere in quote-unquote the Central Yarnum City in like 2 minutes. You can go anywhere. So you'll see one of the shortcuts here. This opens the path to the first lantern. This one's very important to open, and taking shortcuts to get there might be worth it. The reason I don't is because I'm confident in my ability to recover any blood echoes I lose early in the game. So there's some excellent videos on YouTube about those shortcuts. I didn't include them in mine. I do take the shortcuts in this footage, and you can see them if you watch the whole entirety of the footage, but it definitely isn't running straight through the shortcuts, which, you know, honestly might be worth doing. Some other early game advice, some spoilers here, by the way. So any like house that has a lamp in front of it, they're burning incense, which is to scare off the beast, meaning there's probably someone alive in there. And a lot of those people eventually run out of incense, disappear, or die. So talking to them early game can yield some items, or the opportunity to find items, which you'll see some of in these videos, one of which in fact gives you the flamethrower, which you'll see on probably in the next upload. So talking to people in houses is interesting. The dialogue is pretty well written, and there's really no reason not to. Eventually you'll find a safe place you can send people, and all the interactions vary there a little bit, but I'm not going to spoil too much, but I'm going to say in general, it's normally better to send NPCs to the chapel. We will unlock a chapel in the next video to send people to keep them safe. The chapel, pretty good place to send people. The clinic, it's sort of a different experience if you send them to the clinic. Not necessarily bad, but different. Those of you that have already way past that point in the game will obviously sort of the hidden tongue-in-cheek humor of what I'm saying. Okay, so finish exploring the area. Of course, one thing to throw out there is we're going to fight the Cleric Beast here in a moment. The Cleric Beast is entirely optional, and basically the only reason to fight it is for some quick souls, and it unlocks the Kirk Hammer, which, depending on your Arcane build, could wind up being an in-game weapon. For me, it won't be. So there isn't a whole lot of reason to fight that boss at all, except for completion's sake, to get the trophy, blah, 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 blah. But entirely optional, not necessary for progression at all. I do not skip things in general. I like to do the sort of the full playthroughs. You, on the other hand, as a player, could go straight to Father Gascoigne, who will be in the next upload. And Father Gascoigne, of course, is the story progression boss, if you will. Not the boss I'm going to fight, Cleric Beast, in this video. But definitely go ahead and fight the Cleric Beast anyway, because, you know, why not? Part of the big charm of these games is fighting the bosses. And if you want to get 10 humanity, which I kind of recommend doing so you can get the online experience items early in the game, requires you to fight both bosses and defeat them, so you can get up to 10 insight. Another thing I could take a little bit of feedback on is I have some stock footage, about 30 minutes worth of co-op on the first two bosses, on Gascoigne and Cleric Beast. I just wanted to try the co-op system early in the game. I'd only co-opted like mid-game when I started trying that stuff, so I have probably like 10 or 11 fights of co-op versus these bosses. So let me know in the comments if that's something you want to see as like a separate upload, if you will. Like, oh, here's some random uncommentated co-op, because I wouldn't put commentary over that. Maybe the only commentary I provide is how you actually use the bells, but it's not complex at all. You just unless you're trying to do it with a friend. You honestly just equip it, ring it, and you can get summoned to the boss. Or you go to an area, ring it, and you can invade their world, much like a Soapstone in the past games. I guess it is worth mentioning if you do feel like PvP and you're like, I'm gonna lose all this insight. Early in the game, that could be an issue because you might lose access to the insight shop. Later in the game, you're gonna wind up with like way more insight than you even want. So it's not a big deal to lose some of it in PvP. Not at all. There's no need to worry. All right, and here we're gonna open a little shortcut and talk to a little girl who gives us an item that is very, very helpful for the Father Gascoigne fight. In fact, it pretty much makes the fight trivial and easy. Oh, one thing to mention, in these uploads, very rarely will I be like going for style points. I don't use glitches, and I don't use exploits, that's not really my thing. However, like, if there's bad enemy AI, like they tend to do the same attack patterns over and over, they tend to get stuck on things, I'll abuse that to its fullest because that's just, you know, the way the enemy's designed. There's no exploit there. But I won't do anything like get an enemy stuck in a wall or do a wall glitch to skip half the game, because that's definitely a thing. And while I have done some of those things before, I don't like it. I prefer to play games as they're traditionally designed. And that goes back, you know, all the way back to Demon's Souls and Dark Souls when I, you know, for you vets of these series out there, you know, I never even used the bottomless box glitch. I was a non-believer. Definitely didn't do that. Didn't use item dupes in Demon's Souls, you know, etc. That's just not my style. And by the way, you'll see right here at the start of the level is the shortcut that allows you to get down to the dogs, the first shortcut of the game, super quickly, if you were wondering what it was. It was right back there at the 47-second mark. 47-minute mark, excuse me. But yeah, I'm not going to use any exploits or glitches, so this is the wrong series if you're looking to see sort of the easiest way to do things, because I don't necessarily do like the game-breaking unfair stuff. However, if you're looking to see me like exploit every AI weakness a boss has that I can find, that's definitely a thing, and I don't feel bad or apologetic about that. That just seems like good playing to me, so whatever. Alright, up ahead here we will have the first boss of Bloodborne, or at least probably the first boss you're likely to locate. We're going to be doing it with the Hunter's Axe here. Saw Blade, which you saw me grab in the sewers, is a pretty awesome early game weapon. I would recommend either for the first boss, it just depends on what you're more comfortable with. The Saw Spear definitely attacks faster, which can be good on the first boss, due to the strategy that most players employ to beat him, unless you're like co-op or something like that. One thing I will mention about co-oping these bosses from experience, co-op makes them really easy as long as you're not a silly summoner. Silly summoners don't seem to want to exploit the AI. All these bosses tend to aggro the player, or in other words, attack the player that hit them last. So if you have two people, all you have to do is hit them a couple times, get them to come after you. Once the boss starts to counterattack and combo to that player, the other player comes up and hits him, and you just kind of play monkey in the middle with him for easy kills. If both players just dogpile on him, unless both players know the fight, normally one of the two winds up dying, because the boss has more health, and basically a couple things to think about is when you get summoned, you have 30% less HP, so things that didn't one combo you from bosses before will start one comboing you. So that's definitely something to think about. The other thing is, you know, obviously like in all the games, if the host dies, the summoner dies, you're done. The whole fight is lost, blown. So that's something to think about. Play it safe. It takes more time to summon the help, and do the less time to summon and do the help properly than it does to blow the fight when you're trying to rush. Just my take on it. A lot of players I've played with have definitely gotten themselves killed by trying to just dogpile on top of the boss, and there's really no reason to do that. So there's not a whole lot of strategies for this boss, frankly. He is an easy fight. Not to say you won't die to him, but it's a pretty easy fight, honestly. He does do some pretty high deeps. He can do a lot of damage to you in single combos. In this game, bosses can't hit you on the ground, so you're not safe laying on your back. They ground pound you, you're going to take damage. So that's something to think about. Most bosses have a mechanic for the gun parry. The gun parry mechanic on this guy is he takes bullets to the face. The exact number of bullets varies on your range, how good your shot was, things like that. If you shoot him in the head a lot, you'll basically damage his head, which will cause him to collapse to the ground, and you can do a visceral attack. Or as you saw the thing where I walked up to him and stabbed him in the head. Obviously I got a little confident here, didn't feel the need to plop blood vials, and got down by the boss. So, do it again. The second run we are successful. Okay, so that's the parry mechanic, gunshots to the head. Takes less gunshots with a blunderbuss in my experience. You have more range with your shots with the pistol. So either can be used. I prefer the shotgun. You don't even really need to do the parries on this fight, but if you get the opportunity to shoot him in the face, you might as well. They're pretty cool to watch, obviously. Oh my gosh, which leads me to something I kind of forgot to mention. So when you have a pure arcane build, normally your visceral attacks always seem to do less damage than when you have strength and skill. So I'm not sure if the visceral attack is based off your weapon damage, or it's based off your, I don't know, something else. It's based off your strength or your skill. Not even sure. But ultimately, I feel safe in saying that my visceral attacks as arcane always did less than a conventional character build. So that's actually a huge letdown for the build, and it's worth mentioning. Sorry I didn't mention it at the start of the commentary. I just didn't think of it until now, where I actually had the chance to visceral attack somebody. Okay, some other things with the Cleric Beast. You are basically completely safe if you can stand behind him. And standing behind him, honestly not that hard. He has sort of a quick sweep attack if you're behind him, where he'll do a minor sidestep and slash you or swipe you with his arms. The damage is minimal, and as long as he just keeps walking behind him, you can just regain it by hitting him using the regain mechanic. Admittedly, if he hits you with it, then kind of gets you into a combo. That can matter, but in general, just stay behind him. It's a really easy fight. Like right now, I should not be where I am. I feel like I kind of got forced here by his attack pattern. If he puts his back to a corner, meaning you can't stand behind him, it's way safer just to walk away from him because he's very aggressive, and draw him back onto the bridge here where you can get behind him more easily. Understand that the stamina usage per roll in this game is very low, and the iframes and the invincibility frames is very high. So spamming roll, it's pretty effective. When I say spamming, I don't mean like panicking, you're just like mashing it. I mean like, don't be afraid to sort of roll through most attacks. Thank God it's not Dark Souls 2 and we don't have like different iframes based on how much adaptability we have. We just have a standard roll mechanic, which is much better. Camera angles can be your enemy in this fight, unless you're shooting his head. Locking on is normally a mistake. Some other things to think about, if you do enough damage to different parts of his body, they sort of rupture in blood, and that's a good stun mechanic. See there, I ruptured his leg, now he's stunned. You can't stun the same body part twice necessarily, because he has to regenerate them before they can be stunned again. Damaging them reduces his combat effectiveness in various ways, but it's definitely most useful just to have the stun mechanic. When you see him sort of clutch his body and become encased in like a little bloody glow, that's actually him regenerating, and he'll be able to damage body parts again. So like, you can't just keep stunning his head with your shotgun and visceral attacking him all the way to death, because that's the regeneration right there. While his head is bloodied and damaged, you can't actually damage it again and cause another opportunity to visceral attack, or for both souls events, riposte him, if you will. That's not a thing. Right now I know his head's been regenerated, so I can do another visceral attack. The visceral attack is almost for style more than anything else, or when the movements of the boss force you to stand back away from him. Typically not really worth it to spend the bullets or the time to keep blasting out the shotgun unless his movements have forced you in a position where that's optimal. It's normally best just to spend as much time as possible right at his legs, directly behind him, slashing at his legs for those free stun hits. So, otherwise not much to it. The biggest upgrades you can do to help you in this boss fight if you're struggling are HP, so he can never single combo you, and that's pretty much it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you liked this series, and I will see everyone next time.